Hi everyone. In the lead up to the cell and gene therapy bioprocessing and commercialization meeting this month, I asked one of our speakers, Kristin Wolff, VP of Global Policy Strategy and US Government Payer at Bluebird Bio, if she would be happy sitting down and discussing some of the topics going to be covered at the meeting. So welcome, Kristin. I guess to
Thank
start,
you.
no worries, no, thanks for joining us. I guess to start, it would be good if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit more about your current role and what that involves at Bluebird.
Sure. So first of all, thank you again for having me. Really looking forward to the event as a whole and my panel in September. At Bluebird, my role was created to really bring together the nexus between policy and the government payer, perhaps the nexus that is drawn the tightest in the cell and gene therapy world, because these are new therapies, they operate under new paradigms, and they really require a greater flexibility in thinking from the full spectrum of what does the market landscape look like, all the way through the traditional coding, coverage, and reimbursement processes that actually pull through approved therapies to patients to be able to access. So I wear both of those hats at Bluebird. I work to make sure that our global policy strategy is coordinated and consistent across markets, and then specifically in the US, in addition to that, I lead a team that's responsible for what I like to call the block and tackle of negotiations for approved therapies with US government payers, primarily Medicare and Medicaid.
Okay, perfect. And so I guess that makes sense why you're joining us for our panel this month, or in a couple of weeks actually, that's focusing on value, regulatory considerations and access for novel therapies. So I guess to that, what do you think are the biggest challenges at the moment when it comes to these often high cost one-off therapies?
Absolutely. The challenge, I would say, universally across both the regulatory policy side as well as the reimbursement policy side is the newness of the therapy and really the paradigm shift that a one-time administered, potentially curative therapy represents. The systems that we have, the standards that we've set up, the rubrics that we utilize to judge value, to judge safety, to judge efficacy, in the first place, really grew up around chronic disease therapies, as they should have. Those were the only therapies that we've had for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And so making sure that we're maintaining the absolute gold standard of safety and efficacy on the FDA side, and then balancing patient access with the need for healthcare sustainability, healthcare system sustainability, on the reimbursement side, those principles have to stay the same, but how do we put them into the lens of cell and gene therapy? Because it is one-time administered. All of the value of the therapy is conveyed at that single point of administration from a payment perspective, but then of course it accrues to the patient and to the healthcare system over decades. How do you sort of mirror and match those the key principles? That's the challenge that we're facing over and over again in different environments.
Yeah, and you mentioned reimbursement and I guess pricing linked to that, and it's a huge topic when you speak to anyone working within the space, as you mentioned, like these often one-time administered therapies. But what do you think are the main challenges when focusing on applying the right payer models to different markets when looking at the therapies?
Sure. So payer model itself is actually a term that it's been helpful for us to be specific about internally and also externally when we talk about it, because you can think of payer model, and this applies much more in the European context, as a sort of traditional health technology assessment model. And there are specific parameters, like there would be in any kind of modeling methodology, that need to be adapted to be more appropriate for a cell or a gene therapy than for a chronic disease therapy. But looking more broadly at the use of the term payer model, how does a system take into account the full benefit of a cell or a gene therapy? When you think about what that challenge means, it really means a reorientation, both on the side of policymakers, who are often the ones making the macro decisions about what gets paid for and how it gets paid for across the entire healthcare system, all the way down to the more local decision makers who have to manage annual budgets. And it's that tension when we think about pricing and reimbursement for gene therapies in particular that we see and that we're trying to work through. And it's one of the reasons that Bluebird has drawn such a close nexus between their policy work and their payer work. Because in the end, again, for a completely new technology, they're one and the same, getting to change the macroscopic lens of how does a society value, how does a system value these therapies over time? But then how do you balance that with the actual real annual budgetary requirements that are often in place, where there's sometimes much less flexibility, and so you need even more creative solutions.
Okay. And then obviously you said as part of your role, you focus on, I guess, the US specifically. So when looking at the US and CMS and state Medicaid agencies and private insurers, what do you think the key changes are there that need to be made? Or I don't know, what can be done to facilitate wider access to these types of therapies?
Yeah, so I would actually say on the US side, we're on the path to change. We've seen some pretty significant evolutions, not just in how payers across the spectrum, Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, are thinking about paying for cell and gene therapies, but how they're actually doing it. So 4 years ago, if you'd asked me that question, I would have had a long list of things that needed to change across each of those payer segments to really have meaningful, timely access to gene therapies. Now I would say we need to accelerate the pace of progress, but that pace of progress is there, it's happening. A great example is the CMS final rule for value-based payment for drugs in Medicaid that was released at the end of last year. It was part of a bigger rulemaking. Bluebird's focus was only on that one piece around value-based purchasing for drugs. That represented a huge evolution in CMS's thinking to remove what was, or what has often been considered one of the biggest barriers to creative payment models for gene therapies, which is the Medicaid best price rules. In showing that creativity, CMS really demonstrated how much they wanted to work within the confines of statute, but make progress in a meaningful way toward what could be possible. Is it the ideal state? Definitely not. But is it ideal in terms of what is possible now and how much progress we can make? It gets us definitely down that field, for a sports analogy, toward that goalpost. We've seen commercial payers take really creative approaches that take into account the diversity of their customers, employer-sponsored plans, for instance, in thinking through what solutions make the most sense. And one thing that we've really gained, and one thing you'll hear me talk a lot about on the panel, is a focus on operational ease. We have to be creative and we have to be novel, but we can't totally issue operational ease because that in the end can prove to be a significant barrier all on its own, even if we solve the regulatory and legal challenges that we face.
Okay, awesome. I will leave it there. I know we could talk about this for hours. It's a massive topic. But for anyone that's coming to the event, you can see Kristin as part of the panel, as we mentioned. And we'll share this mini interview online and through social channels so people can watch it there. But thank you, Kristin, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in 3 weeks.
I can't wait myself. This in-person piece I'm really excited for. I might have a mask on, but I look forward to seeing you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Take care.